A term you'll often hear bandied about is the term the poverty trap. But what really is the poverty trap? Now, I'm somebody who's experienced poverty, but not lifelong poverty. And as far as I can tell, the poverty trap isn't really just about money. I know it sounds weird, doesn't it? Why is it called the poverty trap if it's not about money? Surely the word poverty just means money. Well, no, that's not the case, really. At least that's not what I experienced. I seem to have been born with a personality that doesn't actually mind poverty. Even more so than that, I might even go as far as to say that generally I prefer poverty in terms of money. This isn't to say that I don't like money, or that I have low ambition, or anything like that, really. I mean, I still play the lottery sometimes. Why would I play the lottery if I didn't have ambitions to wealth? If I won the lottery, would my life still be classed as an ambition towards poverty? Does it make sense that I could use the money to be poor? This all sounds very paradoxical at the moment, doesn't it? But of course there is a very strong historical precedent for the notion of living in poverty. That comes from that old fella who was nailed up on a cross. And there are many organisations and people in the world who do that very thing. They exist in organisations that are wealthy, and they might live in property that looks nice. And they might not want for anything, but they choose to live in a life of poverty. Because poverty isn't just about money. I suppose a modern way of expressing what is meant by this notion of living in poverty would be minimalism, or being minimalist. But the reason you don't really hear about this kind of lifestyle anymore is that with the consumerism that has dominated society since the 1960s, our whole economies are based on consumerism, or at least were until possibly very recently. It's been in everybody's interest to downplay that lifestyle, to imagine that that kind of lifestyle is a negative and not one to be ambitious towards. And that, I suppose that makes a lot of sense, really. It's very difficult to run an economy based on consumerism when there's a popularism among the people for doctrines of poverty. It's not an easy sell, is it? Because poverty, traditionally, is more about squalor, ill health, poverty of opportunity, loneliness, exclusion, and many other words like this that are the real poverty. A bit like when people have been put in jail for a certain amount of time, locked up in a certain condition, they find it difficult to adapt to the normal free world when they're released. For example, if somebody's been sleeping on a hard stone bed for 5 years and they get let out and they go home, they might start sleeping on the floor just because that's how they've been used to sleeping. Similarly with me, when I had brief periods of financial poverty and some other elements of poverty many years ago, I used to find enjoyment in eating a wedge of stale bread. Stale as in it's pretty hard. You could bang it on the table and you don't get much reaction. Well, apart from a loud bang. And that's one of the things I've carried over to times when I'm not even impoverished, either financially or from any other aspect of poverty. I can still find enjoyment in sitting down and eating a clump of stale bread. I wouldn't do it all the time. It's not a food choice I would necessarily recommend to anyone else on the planet, but it's something I can take pleasure in personally, to the same extent as eating a nice chocolate bar. In certain circumstances, if I had a chocolate bar and a stale loaf of bread, for example, when I'm trying to lose weight, I'd go for the stale bit of bread every single time, even though calorie-wise they're probably, I don't know, fairly similar, I suppose. Quite a large chunk of bread. And this is just an example of how poverty in itself doesn't necessarily mean unhappiness. You can find happiness in things that are associated with poverty. You can have a lifestyle that to all intents and purposes to an outsider looks like a lifestyle of poverty. But you yourself can be enjoying yourself. You yourself don't necessarily feel impoverished because generally you're in good health. You might have had a good day, the sun might be out, and all these other things that make life enjoyable. So what I found when I was in a state, I suppose, that could be described as being closest to general poverty, is that the poverty trap isn't really about yourself. It's about everybody else. And yeah, I'll stop you there, and I know it's the old gag, it's not me, it's everybody else. And yeah, no, I'm not coming from this from a egotistical point of view, in that, you know, I'm saying everybody else is mad, all that kind of thing. I think everybody on the planet has a spectrum of madness within themselves, and we all try and get along. That's not really the issue. Although, of course, people who are pretty mad often find themselves in the poverty trap. That, of course, goes without saying, and kind of ties into my point, in that when you're financially poor, it's very difficult to live your life without everybody you encounter treating you in a different way because you're poor. And it's difficult for you as an individual to live a life of poverty when living a life of poverty places you in a part of the market where a large number of the people aren't choosing to be poor. They're there for it's not me, it's them reasons. So, for example, if somebody wanted to choose a life of poverty, sounds weird, but imagine somebody wanted to choose a life of poverty, and they weren't lucky enough to win the lottery, and they didn't have a lot of personal wealth, where would they live? What living options does society provide for somebody who wishes to live a life of poverty? Well, if you aim for the bottom of the food chain, housing-wise, you're probably going to end up in a property that is occupied by other human beings. You're probably not going to occupy a building entirely by yourself. What they call nowadays a building of multiple occupancy. And what are you going to encounter there? You're probably not going to encounter other people who are choosing a life of poverty as a lifestyle choice. And generally speaking, when I was in those kinds of circumstances, a lot of people were all right, but a lot of people weren't. And it's very difficult to have anything in common with anybody you're living in the close vicinity to. Everybody's reason for financial poverty is going to be different. Some might have problems with drugs or alcohol. Some might have problems with their mental state. Some might just be very low IQ. Some might have anger management issues. Some might be very young, and some might be very, very old. And some might have come from another country and barely speak the language. I could list on and on and on, but I think you get the idea, really. And when you go to the job centre, for example, their question might be, you need to be employed. And you say, yeah, well, that's why I'm here. You can't pick up your unemployment benefit if you don't go to the job centre to collect it and get nagged to get a job. But the problem with wanting a life of poverty is you don't generally have the same kind of job ambitions as a lot of the workforce who are trying to target themselves in some kind of career progression. You're quite happy to find not necessarily a low-paying job, not necessarily an easy job, not necessarily a simple job, but just a job that you can enjoy, that pays enough money to not be in actual poverty, put food on the table, pay the rent, not have any worries in the world. But when you go to the job centre, the poor people at the job centre, and now I'm not talking about poor people as in financially poor, but the poor people who have to do the job of sitting behind the desk and interviewing all these hundreds of unemployed people that come through the door every day, each of which have completely different backgrounds and reasons for being there. And that person behind the desk doesn't really have any option but just to view you as a waster, for want of a better word, that they have to interpret you as somebody who's not doing life properly. It's their job to demean you. Have you looked for any jobs this week? Have you applied for any jobs this week? Have you accepted any job offers this week? And then to hand to you a list of these random jobs that if you don't take, you must be some kind of scum. Irregardless of whether they're jobs that you would even like to do or not. And it's a very soulless, impersonal experience. Like a treadmill, like a factory. Scum in, get them a job, get them out again. And if you don't get a job, they start putting you in classrooms and treating you like a 5-year-old. This is how you write your CV. This is how you write. And they put you in these classes again with people from all different reasons for being there. You try and make friends with some of your classmates, but it's very difficult because everybody's so abstractly different in their reasons why they're there. So even though you're getting some social contact, it's not really ever rewarding social contact. It's not beneficial social contact. And you might go to a job interview and their first impression of you is, of course, a down-the-nose look. Been sent from the job centre, have you? Oh, right. So, what are your ambitions? Why do you want to work here? And you have to say, well, the job centre want me to get a job. And that's like, okay, what are your ambitions? And it's like, well, just to work and earn some money, really. They're like, oh, right. And you know that the job you're applying for is a job that pretty much anyone could do. But you've got to go through this process, tick all the boxes. And to be honest, you've no idea whether you'll get on in the job or not. It's a bit of a lottery. Some jobs didn't get on with them at all. Some jobs quite enjoyed them. But the whole concept of, now I just want a job, is very anti the whole job market now as well. As I say in these interviews, they pummel you with all these questions about what are your objectives? What are your career goals? As if stacking shelves in a supermarket and being happy with that just isn't enough. Even though I can go to a supermarket tomorrow and see people that have been doing the same job for 40 years. For some reason, when you get interviewed, it's important for you to say, what are your career goals? And if you don't have any, that's a negative? I don't know. Is it? Why is it a negative? Is it because people know that our society isn't built for people who do normal jobs anymore? You have to do high-paying jobs just to afford a property, or just to afford to live in a nice property. And you face a similar kind of peer pressure, even just from friends and family. If you haven't seen somebody for a while, the first thing they're asking is, what are you doing now? If your response is not much really, you get the impression that maybe there's a little bit of disappointment going on there. You'll hear the phrase, are you all right? Are you doing all right? Are you okay? More and more and more. Is everything all right? In that mildly patronising tone. Are you managing? How are you managing? And so as an individual who's made this rather bizarre choice to be in that situation, the whole of society is rejecting your decision. That is the one life choice that you're not really allowed to make. You're not allowed to be poor. And that is one major part of the poverty trap, in that you just get treated differently by everybody, not by their own choice, but just by the societal way of things. And it's quite ironic in that Europe is supposed to be the global bastion of Christianity. And I'm not an overly religious person. I've probably had some people turn off this video because they just think it's a religious sermon of some kind. But I'm not religious particularly. I just enjoy living poverty, financially, minimalistically, low carbon footprint, all that kind of stuff. And yet we've built up these societies over the last 60 years where the one thing you can't be is in poverty.